Are you creative? Would you like to be? Creativity is the expression of originality. It can be found anywhere, at home or work, as easily as in art or science. Creativity can erupt suddenly or emerge slowly. It's often exciting, but also demanding and frustrating. It can be inspiring, but also erratic and risky. But creativity requires being better as well as different. Something just different can be just odd, and something just better can be just ordinary. True creativity must be both imaginative and meaningful. Next, on Closer to Truth, we ask, what's creativity and who's creative? Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm Robert Kuhn. Creativity comes in many flavors and is well represented in the diverse group we've gathered. 3 of our guests have run large creative organizations. 2 are foremost teachers of creativity. All of them are personally creative. What they do is completely different, but how they think is remarkably similar. Stephen J. Cano is a prolific producer and writer of television series, including The Rockford Files and The A-Team. Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is professor of psychology at the University of Chicago and the author of Flow. Dr. Robert Freeman, a pianist and music historian, has been chief executive of 2 leading music schools, Eastman and the New England Conservatory. Dr. John Kao, trained as a psychiatrist, taught creativity at Harvard and Stanford universities. And Ray Kurzweil is an author, inventor, and entrepreneur who founded and managed 4 technology companies. Steve, you've created or co-created 40 television shows, An American Record, Rockford Files, The A-Team. What does it feel like inside, in your gut, when you create a new show?
Well, you know what, for me, it's always, will I like it? I mean, I have one premise that I start with, which is that I want to be able to go home, look at that television show, and be proud of it. And I always ask myself before I start, would I be willing to come in 3 years hence on Saturday to write a script over the weekend because we're out of material? I mean,
you're proud of all 40?
No, obviously I have made some bad mistakes along the way. I've made some shows that only my parents watched, you know, but they all started off trying to be the best thing I ever did.
Mike, what is flow and what is its relationship to creativity?
By flow, I describe a state that people feel when they're thoroughly involved in whatever they're doing, when they're completely focused on the activity at hand. And I started studying that with artists and musicians and chess players and athletes. And the interesting thing is that despite this great variety of different things people are doing, when they're really involved in what they're doing, their inner states are the same. They describe the phenomenology in the same way. And the relationship with creativity is that essentially these thorough involvement is always there when you are working in a creative medium. It may not result in creativity, but it has to be there. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
Do you see any cross-cultural differences, or the differences between different societies, or is this a uniquely and universal human trait?
It seems universal. What you do to get it may differ from culture to culture, but the state is described very similarly in Korea or India or China or Japan.
Bob, tell us about some of the great composers, Brahms, Beethoven, Mozart, and how they compose. What is the nature of their creativity? Their styles are very different, but is there a root similarity in their creativity?
Beethoven left us large numbers of individual sketchbooks, single pages, notebooks, continuity drafts, and obviously worked on a fair number of pieces at the same time with great pain. These have been interpreted more recently by scholars like Joseph Kerman and Lewis Lockwood, and I think can be really well followed by members of your audience with great interest. Mozart, on the other hand, was well known for hardly leaving any marks behind, that he could go for a walk of the kind that you described in Flow and come back and write a whole string quartet. On the other hand, there are about 150 torsos of pieces by Mozart, and he only wrote 620 pieces altogether, which remain as torsos. And
So was creativity harder for Beethoven than it was for Mozart?
it looks as though it was harder. Brahms composed more like Beethoven, except that he went to the trouble of destroying all of his tracks afterwards, so it's very hard to get at the sketches.
John, what can you tell us about the process of creativity?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to recognize that our popular image of Archimedes jumping out of the bathtub or someone with a light bulb popping off over their head is just really a part of an overall grammar, you might say, or a series of events that occurs around the creative process. That if you look at creativity in some respects as moving from the existing to the preferred or the existing to the desirable, that there's a whole bunch of preparation prior to that light bulb, and then there's a whole bunch of work that needs to follow on after that. And that the light bulb doesn't just happen over the head of one person necessarily, although the process clearly can occur in between the ears of a creative person, which in some respects we all are, but also pops up in between people, in the space in between, and also within organizations, within society, if you will.
Well, if there was ever a light bulb to pop over someone's head, he's sitting right next to you. Ray, compare for us the process of creativity when you create new companies versus when you write original books.
Well, I'll mention one similarity and one difference. The similarity is an act of sort of fantasy or daydreaming. I mean, when I start a technology, I try to imagine, just fantasize, I'm at a conference 4 years from now and I'm presenting how this thing works. And I just go with that fantasy and then find that I'm describing how it must have, the problems we must have solved, and well, how did I solve those? And I kind of work backwards from there. And the process of a book is very similar. You have something you're trying to accomplish, and I fantasize how I would accomplish that. So there's a lot of daydreaming. Really, a lot of creativity is done while you're sleeping. I have a discipline of trying to think about a problem before I go to sleep, and just frame what I know about it, and then in the morning, somehow a lot of it's there.
I went to bed last night thinking the question I was going to ask you.
But the difference is that technology is catching the wave. It can't be a little bit too early or a little bit too late. It won't work. You've got to be right on the wave of what's currently feasible.
What's the difference?
In writing, you have a much broader canvas to work with. I mean, my latest book is about the 21st century, so it's not just what's feasible today.
Mike, I want you to help me. I need some help. Analyze me. I've been in a creative mode working on this show, but I have to tell you, I'm continuously grumpy. Now, that's the only word I can use in television to describe how people describe me and living with me and working on this show. But paradoxically, even though I'm so grumpy, it's the most joy I've ever had. Am I just nuts?
I think people mistake the outward signs of jolliness for how you feel inside. I mean, most people, I think Beethoven, when he was struggling with writing, felt probably like you did, namely that his
hair was longer.
Yeah.
He would not have been an easy colleague.
No, he was grumpy too, but inside he may have felt so consumed by the project he was working, and this was the greatest thing in his life.
Are you grumpy when you write a novel?
No, I have so much fun doing it. For me, writing is a release, something I really enjoy doing. I look forward to it. I loved what Ray was just saying about your sleeping hours producing results. Sometimes I'll end a chapter and I'll think, boy, I've written myself into a hole here, and the next morning I'll get up and I'll go,
but it is a struggle. I mean, it's not an easy process. It's the hardest work you can do, and you're constantly faced with problems to solve. And as John mentioned, the light bulb is a very small part of it. There's a whole process of iterative improvement. I mean, I try to, writing a book, I try to write the book very quickly, in 1 month, at least an outline of it, and then iteratively improve it. And you're constantly framing problems that you need to solve and trying to find solutions and then finding their problems with it. And it's really an iterative process, and it's a struggle, which is why a lot of people find it.
One of the things that John said too, about the creativity of the light bulb going off and that not being the whole process, but and what you're saying too is like I'll outline a book, and that will be the framework of the novel. That's like the architecture of the novel. That, you know, I know what the first act is. I know what my complication is at the top of Act 2. I know what my second act curtain is. Some people say, well, books shouldn't be written in 3 acts. I think any good story has to be told in 3 acts, just like a piece of music has to have its structure. And so I work that structure out, and that's very cerebral. It's very, you know, I know what the book is about. I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and it's very cerebral, the structure. And then I write like a 60 or 70 page narrative, which breaks it into chapters even. And once I've got that done, then I can enjoy the writing process because I won't deviate too much from it. Sometimes I'll find mistakes that I've made in the structure, but basically the books write pretty easily after I've
John, what's your experience?
Well, I was going to follow on what Steve says by saying it sounds like you write books in several different ways. I mean, some of it involves structure and really having a plan, and then some of it is about the play and the joy and the discovery. And I think that says something about the creative process, too, that it's not just one way of thinking, but it's multiple, in a sense, intelligences or ways of thinking that kind of come together. It is kind of a tension, in a way, to have a goal, which we've all said may be part of this process. A picture of the future is Ray's phrase, with all of the uncertainty of trying something, failing, experimenting over here and failing, and having an enormous amount of uncertainty. So to be certain and uncertain, to balance these paradoxes can be very difficult.
Doesn't creativity have to have a better side? Creativity has to be something more than just different to be creative. I mean, it has to be better, or some new way has to have something productive.
Robert, I have a question for Steve along those lines. When you sit down to write a book, given what you just said, you're trying to write something which is good and which is moving and which satisfies your standards of very high excellence. In that way, I could compare you to what Mozart thought he was doing.
You had that comparison before ever?
Mozart and I are frequently compared.
To what degree would it complicate things for you to add to what I've just said, what Beethoven's principal preoccupation was, according to me at any rate, which is to write something which would be a masterwork for the ages? That's to say, where a sort of historical self-consciousness comes in on this.
Well, I would reject that as a concept because I believe when you put that kind of pressure on yourself to be, you know, to be writing something that is so monumental that that will live thousands of years after you, you know, then I think you by nature you just dry up your creative process.
Well, just want to bring up another aspect of creativity. We've been talking about great individual contributors, but when you're creating technology, that's necessarily a group process. And there's a whole other dimension to it, because technology today is so complex, it's necessarily interdisciplinary. And for example, in speech recognition, we have signal processing experts, speech experts, computer experts, linguists, and they need to work together. And they're all speaking different languages, even for the same concept. So we need to establish our own language. We'll actually spend some months just deciding on our own language, which is actually useful because if anybody overhears our conversations, they have no idea what we're talking about. But then I have a technique where, in order to get people to think outside the box, I'll give a signal processing problem to the linguists and vice versa, and let them use the disciplines they've grown up in on a completely different problem, and approach it from a way that the original experts in that field would never think of approaching it.
John, have you worked with technology companies as well?
Several times, yeah. And I think what Ray says is very true, that in order to move people out of a literal definition of what is interesting to pursue, it's often really important to almost be like the curator of a set of experiences in a group where you're bringing people with very different points of view together to produce a new perspective on things. So it matters a great deal how you, in a sense, blend together disciplines, points of view that maybe in normal life wouldn't coexist, or where...
Are you saying that the creative process in an organization has some different characteristics to the creative process as an individual? Taking Steve Cannell and Mozart as one group.
Those guys.
And, technology companies like Ray's and others that you've worked with.
I think in this case I would argue that there are some similarities in the sense that everyone at this table is probably a great example of this kind of arbitrage between different kinds of work or different ways of seeing things, you know, within one person and one career. I mean, nobody at this table really has had, one kind of activity they've pursued from beginning to end. Their lives, in a sense, have been about a creative improvisation around themes, adding in new stuff when things got boring, adding to a portfolio. And in a high-tech company, it's often very similar as well. You start off with some very significant initial moves, the founding team or whatever. But in terms of injecting the kind of energy and additional perspective that is required to be successful, you know, you have to be a great chef or a great manager of certain tensions, you know, finding the sweet spot all the time.
Well, I think there's a relationship between Mike's concept of flow and group process. I mean, flow is hard to achieve for an individual because we're so distracted with our daily needs and problems, and so to really connect in that profound way to flow with your creative task is difficult to achieve, but is a key concept in creativity. It's even harder to achieve in a group because people have political issues with the group, and they're not all communicating. So to really achieve that kind of flow in a group where everybody is really connected to the project, where ideas come out from a group where you don't even know, well, whose idea was that? That's really when groups are creative. But groups then can accomplish things that individuals never can because you have a blending of perspectives that are impossible.
Absolutely. Ray and John, you just made, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, a really important point, according to me at any rate. We all start out as fairly narrow disciplinary specialists. Nothing which is worthwhile can be achieved except through the kind of blend of intelligences that is coming from a bunch of different disciplinary specialists working together. And that's not an easy process.
Yeah, but is there a danger in today's world of giving too much individual creativity away? Isn't there something to be said for people sitting out on the loners, you know, 3, 4 standard deviations out who are doing things that change the world independently?
Well,
Depends what the field is.
I think that,
Yeah, okay.
that we can spark each other.
Yeah.
And in television, one of the interesting things is we work with staffs of writers, and it's very interesting to watch this happen. This was what you guys were both just saying, that you have to give up your sense of self to the group. You have to say, okay, we're all here to try and make a story for Bob to write, and so we're all going to put that together. And I always characterize ideas as little pink things that are running around on the floor, and we can stomp them to death with negativity, or you can say somebody might throw out a kind of a stupid idea. Instead of saying, oh, that's dumb, say, well, you play with it for a little bit, and then something comes from that, and another person will add their sensitivity to it, and then you go, you know, that's kind of cool when it goes like that, and the next thing you know, you've built something amongst all of you that you never would have thought yourself, and then Bob will then take it to write it, because we're creating it for him as a staff of writers for him to write, and then he'll give his own stamp on his own creative flavor to it.
It's yes and versus yes but, in a sense, which is what you get in great jazz. I mean, in great jazz, you've got talented people, they've got to work together. When somebody offers you an idea, you've got to go with it, you know, and sort of add to it, rather than exercising judgment on the front end, because that's how you get to something truly sweet.
Ray, how important is risk in creativity, the willingness to accept failure?
Well, an important part of creativity is failure and one's attitude towards it. I mean, my own view of failure is it's just success deferred. But not everybody feels that way. And if you're afraid of failing, if that's a devastating experience, then you can't be creative. You have to really just see it as part of the iterative process of getting to where you need to go.
God, I really like that. It's success deferred. That's a great
That's a great line.
way to look at it.
And it's inherent in learning. I mean, we never did anything perfect the first time through. We didn't ride a bike the first time we got on it. We had to fail in order to learn. You know, you look at designers. Designers take an idea and they make a model. The model, by definition, is going to be destroyed preferably as quickly as possible, so you can go from version 1.0 to version 2.0.
I think it's important to have target fixation when you're creating, and not think about failure, not think about criticism, not think about rewards, not think about anything but what you're trying to do.
Steve, I want to try to get inside your head since I didn't have a chance with Mozart. Since I didn't have a chance with Mozart. You love being a writer. Since we've known each other for many, many years, you have a sparkle in your eye whenever we talk about writing. It's never about success. It's never about money. It's always about the writing. Remarkably, you are dyslexic, and I want you to tell us what that means.
Well, I have pretty classic dyslexia. I mirror read. I'm a very slow reader. I read about 200 words a minute. I have sequencing difficulties, which makes computer work very hard for me because it's a very sequential piece of equipment, and so I would have to read the instructions every time to turn my computer on. I can't remember the sequence of events. You know, I have recall difficulties.
What kind of grades did you get in high school and college in English?
Terrible. Terrible. As a matter of fact, I flunked 3 grades before I got out of high school. And I went back to my 20-year reunion at my high school. My English professor
I love this story. Tell it.
was sort of circling me, and this guy had given me Fs through my whole career as a student there, and he finally came up to me at the end of the evening, and by this time I'd won Emmys, and I had a fairly high-profile career, and he came up to me and he said, "So," he says, you really make your living writing." Just shocked him. But what he was looking at was spelling, and spelling is not writing, and as I can make up a sentence and speak it to you, I can make it up and put it on paper. And so that process, and one of the things about dyslexia is it does generally also comes with it abstract thought. People who are very good with abstract thought have dyslexia. And Edison was dyslexic. Einstein, 2 of our greatest inventors, that were dyslexic.
But yeah, in general, it's these 100 people I interviewed in my study of very creative individuals. Practically all of them, I would say 90 out of 100, had pretty bad things to say about their formal education, about their schooling. They usually had 1 or 2 teachers that made a big difference in their lives that they remembered fondly, but the structured, mass-produced instruction that schools generally provide just was something they couldn't take. So in that sense, I think there is a disconnect there. And it's
John, speaking as a psychiatrist.
Well, I think that what we're circling around is this issue of who gets to decide what is valuable. Because in some respects, and you also posed earlier the question of, well, creativity in relation to what? I mean, I think we always have to look at value creation as well as simply coming up with something new. Otherwise, throwing paint against the wall would be very, very creative. It's not very valuable. The question is who decides, and especially when you look at a social situation or an organization, there are plenty of people who are going to look at a new idea or somebody who's the creative troublemaker and say, that's not particularly good. And so the question becomes, when does the perspective change so that that new idea really has its day in the sun?
Well, the world is changing. I mean, we're entering an era where the creation of new knowledge is really the wealth and power of nations, organizations, and individuals. It's no longer just being a discipline in manufacturing or being intelligent in some rote way. It's really creating new knowledge. That's why, really, the United States is as successful as it is economically, and why there are economic problems elsewhere, is that we have a culture of risk-taking, of a respect of going to new frontiers, and we reward that. We have entrepreneurial institutions of venture and angel capital and employee stock options, all designed to create new knowledge in everything, music, graphic arts. The web is giving tremendous empowerment to the arts, because these web pages need pictures and music, and that's where wealth is being created today.
We need a final question. This is a prediction from everyone. I want a short answer. 100 years from today, we want to fast forward 100 years. Where is creativity making its greatest contribution to society? Steve.
Thank you, Robert. Where is it making? I would say, because I'm a writer, I would say it's in literature. I would hope it's in literature, because I believe that's about thought, and I think society should be about thought.
Right?
Well, 100 years from now, we will have expanded our intelligence and creativity by merging with non-biological intelligence. And we'll be creating new types of entities that we can't imagine today, such as virtual reality environments. But we'll still have elements that are based in our foundation of music, art. But music, art, various forms of culture will be the primary expression of knowledge.
John?
I think in 100 years we'll have a lot better tool set to take our innate creativity, the stuff that happens to us at night and all during the day as well, and to be able to collaborate with one another in a more effective way, and to be able to take our ideas and realize them much more immediately.
Bob?
I'd like to refer to something that Mike said a little while ago. The creative teacher, whether it was in 1800, 1900, this year or 100 years from now, is going to be somebody who sees in each of his or her students what makes each of those people different and enables them as individuals to see their own futures when they're young.
Right?
Yeah, I think that the technological creativity that was described is certainly going to continue and flourish, but I'm not sure that will be the most important form of creativity that we will need in the future, which has to do really with finding our place in this evolving cosmos and try to find a way of live together, respect each other, and not try to destroy everything in order to feel good about ourselves.
What's creativity? It's certainly not standardized test intelligence. Stephen Cannell proves that all by himself. So how do you solve a problem creatively? Don't get too smart too quickly. Expert opinion stalls the creative engine. Oftentimes, it's our own voice that we need to listen to first. Cogitate, meditate, brood, agonize. Oddly enough, uncertainty, ambiguity, and doubt are all friends of the creative process. Lose yourself. Feel the flow. But remember what Abraham Maslow said. Creativity might be as much found in a first-rate chicken soup as in a third-rate painting. Suffer with humor to get closer to truth. I'm Robert Kuhn.